"Excuse me, but can you move?" The voice came out sharp, demanding, as a man in his late 40s, dressed in an expensive suit, stood towering over the woman seated in the exclusive airport lounge. His gaze, cold and dismissive, flicked up and down her form, clearly unimpressed. "My son needs to sit here," he continued, his tone dripping with entitlement. The woman, dressed in a professional black business suit, looked up slowly, meeting his eyes with a calmness that contrasted sharply with his condescending attitude. She was poised, her dark skin glowing under the overhead lights, but it wasn't just her appearance that drew attention. It was the way she carried herself, with an unspoken confidence that seemed to radiate power. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't backing down. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but carrying a note of firmness. The man glanced back at his son, who stood beside him, awkwardly clutching his backpack. The teenager shifted his weight from foot to foot, unsure of the confrontation unfolding before him. He looked like he was trying to figure out if he was supposed to be embarrassed or just play along. "Can you move?" the man repeated, louder now. "My son is going to sit here, and you're taking up space." For a moment, the woman remained silent, her gaze unwavering. There was a subtle pause, almost as if she was weighing her options. It wasn't just the man's words that had rubbed her the wrong way. It was the assumption that because of who she was and what she looked like, she should simply give in. People like him thought they could make demands, assuming she was just another face in the crowd. But this time, she wasn't going to be silent. She slowly stood up, the noise of the busy airport fading away as she straightened her blazer and turned to face the man squarely. Her voice cut through the tension. "I'm sorry, but I'm not moving." The man's eyebrows furrowed, disbelief mixing with frustration. "You don't get it," he snapped. "I'm a paying customer here, and my son needs a seat." The woman's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Actually, you don't get it. I own this airline." The words seemed to hang in the air, lingering long after she spoke them. The man's expression shifted from irritation to confusion, his mind clearly trying to process what he had just heard. His son glanced nervously between them, clearly unsure of how to react. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the woman straightened her shoulders, her stance even more commanding now. "I suggest you rethink your approach next time. My business is built on respect, not assumptions." The man opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The teenager beside him shifted his weight again, clearly uncomfortable. There was an awkward pause as the man stood there, his pride stung. But the woman wasn't done. She wasn't finished with this exchange. As the tension between them simmered, she turned to the gate agent standing nearby, watching the scene unfold. "Please make sure these two are relocated to a different section," she said coolly, her voice still calm. "They're in my way." The gate agent nodded, but the woman didn't wait for any more acknowledgement. She walked toward the gate with an air of finality, leaving the man and his son standing behind, now surrounded by the hum of murmurs and glances from the other passengers. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal again, but the man, still reeling from what had just happened, couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just been handed a hard lesson in humility. But before we continue, let me ask you, what would you do in a situation like this? Let us know in the comments. Would you have stood up for yourself, or simply walked away? Also, if you are enjoying this story and you feel the weight of what's at stake, then kindly subscribe to stay updated, because this story is far from over. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because we can all learn from moments like this. And together, maybe we can change the narrative. The woman stepped away from the scene, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor of the airport lounge. As she walked toward the gate, she could feel the stares of the other passengers lingering on her back. Some were curious, others sympathetic, but all of them were aware that something significant had just occurred. The murmur of hushed conversations followed her, but she paid them no mind. She'd been used to attention like this for years, though it was rarely ever positive. She had learned long ago to keep moving forward, no matter what. Her name was Olivia Carter, a name that carried weight in certain circles, though few would recognize it today. She was 37, a woman of poise and precision, with an aura of quiet confidence that seemed to set her apart. As a self-made CEO, Olivia had spent years fighting her way to the top, navigating a world that often felt hostile to women, especially women of color. Her company, Skyline Airways, was a major player in the travel industry, known for its innovative approach to luxury air travel and exceptional customer service. But it hadn't come easily. She hadn't grown up in luxury or privilege. Raised in a modest home in Detroit, Michigan, Olivia had spent her childhood watching her mother work tirelessly as a nurse, trying to provide for Olivia and her two younger brothers. They lived in a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce, and the odds were stacked high against them. Despite the challenges, Olivia was determined to build a better life, not just for herself, but for others who came from backgrounds like hers. She earned her degree in business, working multiple jobs to pay her tuition. She landed her first job at a small startup, where she climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and skill. It wasn't long before she became the youngest executive at the company, and eventually, she left to create her own path, founding Skyline Airways. It was her dream, one she had fought for with every fiber of her being. But dreams come at a price. Even now, as she made her way toward the gate, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest. The price of success was not just the sacrifices of late nights, endless meetings, and constant stress. It was the emotional toll of constantly having to prove herself. Olivia knew the world was watching her, expecting her to fail. There were always whispers about how she made it, the implication always being that it wasn't through her abilities alone. How many times had she heard that she had to be lucky to be in the position she was in? How many times had she felt the sting of being dismissed simply because of her race and gender? And yet, she never let it show. The face she showed to the world was calm, controlled, and composed. It was a mask she wore well. But inside, Olivia was tired. She was tired of being the exception, tired of having to work 10 times harder than her peers just to be seen as equal. She longed for the day when she could simply exist without constantly having to prove herself. Today, she had already proven something, but it was far from the end of the story. No, this moment was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would force her to confront something she had tried to ignore for far too long. As Olivia approached the gate, she could hear the hum of idle chatter. The airport terminal was a luxurious blend of polished marble floors, plush seating areas, and sleek glass walls. Everything screamed wealth, exclusivity, and privilege. Passengers in designer clothes wandered through the space, carrying the unspoken knowledge that they belonged. The environment was a direct reflection of the high-end service Skyline Airways was known for. Every detail was carefully crafted to make the wealthy and the powerful feel comfortable, elevated, and catered to. Olivia stood there for a moment, gazing out at the airplane waiting on the tarmac, the sleek silver wings glinting in the sunlight. This was her world now, the world she had built. She felt a wave of pride, but it was brief. There was still so much more to do. So much more to prove. Her mind flickered back to the confrontation. The man, standing there so certain of his right to demand space, to command attention. He had no idea who he was speaking to. It wasn't the first time someone had made assumptions about her because of the color of her skin. And it wouldn't be the last. It was exhausting. But it was also a constant reminder of why she had to keep fighting. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, and told they didn't belong. The lounge around her buzzed with activity, but Olivia felt strangely isolated in the midst of it all. She was used to being in rooms like this, surrounded by people who viewed her as just another piece of the corporate puzzle, another figurehead they could admire from afar. But she didn't fit in with the luxury and ease of it all. Her success was not handed to her. She had worked for it. And she was damn tired of the subtle, and not so subtle, reminders that some people believed she didn't deserve it. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, pushing the negative thoughts away. She couldn't afford to linger on them. Not now. Not when the world was watching, waiting for her to fail. Just as she exhaled, she was jolted from her thoughts by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned, and there he was, the man from earlier, still looking flustered but now accompanied by a manager in a black suit. The manager's eyes darted nervously between Olivia and the man, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Miss Carter," the manager said, his voice tentative. I wanted to apologize for the situation earlier. We're going to relocate Mr. Harrison and his son, as you requested. Olivia nodded, her expression neutral. Thank you, she said, her voice even. But I think it's time for us all to understand the importance of respect, regardless of who we are or where we come from. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. It's the very least we owe each other. The manager nodded, clearly relieved, but the man, Mr. Harrison, was still standing there, looking like he didn't quite know what to say. His face had gone redder than before, the mix of anger and embarrassment now palpable. Olivia met his eyes again, her gaze steady. This time, there was no mask. There was no need for one. I suggest you take a seat somewhere else, she said, her voice low but commanding. And think about what you've just learned today. As the manager escorted the disgruntled man and his son away, Olivia remained standing there, her chest still tight but her resolve stronger than ever. She had made her point, but the encounter had left her with more questions than answers. She wasn't naive. She knew that the world wouldn't change overnight. But in moments like this, she realized something more important. Sometimes, it was about showing people who you were and why they should never underestimate you. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The tension in the air was thick. She had just crossed paths with a man who thought he could get away with disrespecting her because of her race, but Olivia Carter wasn't the kind of woman who let anyone off easy. And as she made her way toward the private section of the terminal, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of something more, a new challenge, a new purpose. She was done playing nice. As Olivia made her way to the private section of the terminal, her thoughts raced. The air felt thick with the kind of tension she had spent most of her life avoiding, constantly bracing for the inevitable moment when someone would try to dismiss her, reduce her to nothing more than her skin color or her gender. Today, the moment had arrived, and she had handled it with the grace and control she had spent years perfecting. But inside, she was tired of being the strong one, the one who always had to rise above the small-mindedness of others. Tired of carrying the weight of their ignorance. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way down the sleek, modern corridor, the sound sharp in the quiet, high-end environment. She passed through the luxurious seating area, where executives and well-dressed passengers sat, oblivious to the subtle tensions that had unfolded just moments earlier. The privileged comfort around her was a stark contrast to the wariness she felt inside. For Olivia, luxury had never felt truly comfortable, because it was never truly hers. It was a facade, a shiny shell, and she was simply passing through. She felt the need to compose herself, to not let the encounter linger, to keep pushing forward. But she couldn't. Olivia's mind was still focused on the man, Mr. Harrison. His words, the way he had dismissed her as though she were invisible. His entitlement, his judgment, it burned in her chest. She had met people like him before, people who believed their position, their wealth, their whiteness, gave them the right to dismiss anyone who didn't fit their narrow worldview. But today had been different. Today, she had stood up for herself. But had it been enough? She couldn't help but replay the moment in her head, the condescension in his voice, the way he presumed she was a nobody simply because she wasn't a pale, well-dressed man like him. It wasn't the first time she'd been looked down on, but it was one of the few times she had dared to confront the person responsible for it. And while it felt good, in some ways, to put him in his place, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Not for her. Not for the countless others who had suffered silently, who had been too afraid to speak out. The door to the private lounge opened with a soft swoosh, and Olivia stepped through, immediately enveloped by the silence of the exclusive space. It was quieter here, almost serene. The walls were a pristine white, decorated with minimalist art, and the plush chairs and tables were arranged with calculated precision. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of fresh coffee and luxury perfumes. She felt a brief moment of calm wash over her, but it was fleeting. The lounge was designed for people who had earned their place in the world. Wealthy businesspeople, dignitaries, high-profile clients. People who had, in the eyes of the world, made it. But Olivia knew better than to let the appearance of wealth fool her. She had earned her place here, just like she had earned every corner of her success. She was no stranger to the game of perception. She had spent most of her life playing it. But as she approached the concierge desk, her eyes fell upon the last person she wanted to see. There, standing in front of the sleek counter, was Mr. Harrison. His face was flushed with anger, his son beside him, looking equally uncomfortable. The manager, the one who had tried to smooth things over earlier, was now standing with them, clearly trying to placate Harrison, who was speaking in rapid, agitated tones. The sight of him again felt like a punch in the gut. Olivia stood still for a moment, watching the scene unfold. Harrison's voice was rising again. "I don't care who she is. You should have done something. She humiliated me in front of everyone. I don't care how much money she claims to have, she had no right to speak to me like that." The manager, visibly distressed, nodded nervously. "Mr. Harrison, I assure you, we're addressing the issue. She did request a seat be made available to you and your son. I don't want her just to move me. I want her out of here. She's clearly some kind of fraud. Who would give her the right to speak to me that way?" Harrison's voice became louder, more demanding. His words hung in the air like venom, directed toward Olivia without her having to say a word. He had no idea who he was talking to, or perhaps he just didn't care. The truth was, it wasn't about her. It was about his pride. And now, his pride was being threatened by the very woman he had dismissed. Olivia took a deep breath. Her heart was beating faster now. But her composure remained intact. She wasn't going to let this man's fragile ego get the better of her. With slow, deliberate steps, she walked toward them. Her heels clicked on the floor, loud and purposeful. Harrison looked up, his eyes narrowing when he saw her approach. His mouth opened as though to speak, but she cut him off before he could say anything. "I see you're still having trouble accepting the reality of what just happened," Olivia said calmly, her voice measured but firm. "You can't seem to fathom why a woman like me would have the right to speak to you. It's clear you think people like me shouldn't be in a position to do so." The room seemed to pause. Harrison stiffened, but Olivia's gaze didn't waver. She stood her ground. "Mr. Harrison," she continued, her tone sharp, "you see, this isn't just about a seat. This is about a belief system. A belief that people who look like me are somehow inferior to you, that our voices don't matter. Well, let me be clear. We do matter. And my voice is just as valid as yours." Harrison's face turned crimson, his eyes wild with disbelief. "You think you can talk to me like that because you own a few airplanes?" he sneered. "You think because you built an empire from the ground up, you have the right to— To what? To demand respect?" "Yes," Olivia interrupted, her voice steady, no hint of hesitation. "You may not like it, but respect isn't something that's given based on how much money you have, or who your family is. It's earned. And right now, you're failing." The room seemed to grow smaller, the weight of Olivia's words sinking in, not just for Harrison but for everyone around them. Even the manager, who had been doing his best to avoid the confrontation, stood frozen, looking between them. Harrison's son, still standing beside his father, shifted nervously, his eyes flicking back and forth. He was clearly uncomfortable with the tension, and his discomfort made Olivia feel a brief pang of sympathy. But she quickly suppressed it. This was about more than just him. It was about the message she was sending. And then there it was, the moment of truth. Harrison's face twisted in a mixture of embarrassment and rage, but there was nothing he could do to take back the words he had already spoken. Olivia had stripped him of his power, leaving him standing there, helpless and exposed. The silence in the room was deafening. "Do you have anything else to say?" Olivia asked, her voice low, the challenge hanging in the air. Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stood there, eyes locked on hers, completely defeated. The manager cleared his throat, looking at Olivia. "Ms. Carter, perhaps we should move this discussion to a more private area." Olivia nodded, never taking her eyes off Harrison. "I think we're done here." As Olivia turned away from Harrison and his son, she could feel the weight of the moment settle over her. The tension in the air still clung to her skin, but her composure remained steady. The manager, clearly eager to move on, ushered her toward a quieter corner of the terminal. She could hear Harrison's muffled voice behind her, but she ignored it. His words, once filled with anger and condescension, now seemed hollow. The power had shifted, and she was no longer going to allow him to dictate the narrative. For years, Olivia had spent most of her time navigating spaces where her identity was questioned, doubted, or outright ignored. She had long since learned to suppress the fire that boiled beneath her calm exterior, but today, something had changed. The conversation with Harrison, though painful, had awakened something inside of her. A part that was tired of being the quiet observer, tired of letting moments like this pass without consequence. She had made it clear that she was not to be underestimated. Yet, in the pit of her stomach, she knew this moment wasn't just about proving a point to Harrison. It was about proving it to herself. As she approached the private lounge, the manager quickly stepped aside, his demeanor shifting from discomfort to a forced politeness. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice softer now. "If you would like, we can offer you the VIP room for some privacy. It's the least we can do after the inconvenience." Olivia nodded, but her mind wasn't on the room. She was still replaying the words Harrison had said to her, the way he had tried to diminish her at every turn. It stung more than she cared to admit. "Thank you, but I'll be fine here," she replied. She appreciated the gesture, but she didn't want to hide away. The last thing she needed was to retreat into the shadows while that man continued to feel entitled to everything he hadn't earned. The manager nodded again and stepped back, leaving her to herself. Olivia exhaled slowly, looking around the lounge. The silence was almost suffocating now, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just transpired. Her mind began to settle, but there was still a flicker of something she couldn't ignore. She wasn't done yet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. Olivia pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text from her assistant, Camille. "Olivia, we've just confirmed that the flight for this afternoon is a full VIP charter. The investors from Horizon are on board. They'll be expecting you at the private terminal. Let me know if you need anything." The name Horizon jumped off the screen, and for a moment, Olivia's grip on the phone tightened. Horizon was one of the biggest airline competitors in the industry, an empire, really. But it wasn't just the name that caught her attention. It was the fact that she was expected to meet these investors at a private terminal today, that she was the one who had been scheduled to personally oversee their flight. She had arranged this meeting herself. That meant she wasn't just the CEO of Skyline Airways. She was the one who had the power to shape the industry's future. Olivia's breath caught in her throat for just a moment before she steadied herself. Harrison didn't know it, but today wasn't just about an argument over a seat on a plane. This was the moment she would shift the power dynamics for good. She wasn't some faceless businesswoman to be tossed aside. She was the force behind a growing airline that had the resources and the capability to change the industry in ways no one had anticipated. The airport was still buzzing with the low hum of activity, but Olivia's focus sharpened. The weight of her own accomplishments settled around her like armor. She had worked for every bit of this. And now, she was going to make sure the world knew it. Her fingers flew across the screen of her phone as she typed a quick reply to Camille. "Thank you. I'll meet them in the private terminal. Prepare everything accordingly, and let's make sure they understand who they're dealing with today." She took a moment to pause. She wasn't going to let this moment pass without making sure Harrison knew who he had tried to disrespect. It was time for him to realize that no matter how much money or privilege he had, he couldn't undermine the hard work, the strategy, and the intellect that had brought her to this point. Olivia stood up from her seat, taking one last look at the terminal. She could feel the eyes of those around her on her back again, though this time, they weren't filled with judgment, they were filled with curiosity. And that's when it hit her. People had watched her, thought they knew her, thought they could dismiss her. They couldn't see what she had built, what she was capable of. She wasn't just a woman in an expensive suit. She wasn't just another woman of color trying to navigate a system built for white men. She was the woman who had created something real. And today, she was going to make sure that every person in this terminal, every person in this industry, understood that. As she walked toward the private section of the terminal, she felt the familiar pull of her ambition, the same drive that had brought her this far. The tension with Harrison had been just the beginning, but the real challenge, the real shift, was going to happen when she faced the investors from Horizon. The power had shifted, But the game was far from over. When Olivia entered the private terminal, she was greeted by the same manager from earlier. His posture was still tentative, but this time, his expression was more respectful, more aware of who she truly was. "Ms. Carter, everything is prepared for the Horizon investors. They're ready for you," he said, his tone more deferential now. Olivia nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She glanced toward the sleek black cars parked outside, ready to take her to the waiting private jet. But it wasn't the cars that mattered now, it was the realization of what was about to happen. She was no longer just an underdog trying to prove herself. She was a powerhouse. Harrison might have thought she was just another woman to be trampled, but she was about to show him just how wrong he was. She wasn't here to play by anyone's rules but her own. And as Olivia walked through the door into the private terminal, she could feel the weight of the room shift with her. This was her moment. The stakes were higher now. She wasn't just standing up to a man who had underestimated her, she was stepping into her own power. And in that moment, it was clear, the power was hers. The hum of the private terminal softened to a hush as Olivia stepped through the frosted glass doors. The room felt suspended, polished walnut tables, low conversation, the faint hiss of an espresso machine, like everything had paused to see who would move first. The manager hovered near the entry with a clipboard, posture squared now, tone deferential. Two flight attendants from the charter team stood at attention, immaculate in navy, their name badges glinting under the downlights. Beyond the panoramic window, the Skyline jet waited on the sunlit apron, sleek, silver, and unapologetically hers. The door behind Olivia thudded open. "Unbelievable," Harrison barked, stride heavy, sun trailing a step behind. "You can't keep me out of here. I have priority status. I want to speak to whoever is actually in charge." He scanned faces, searching for an ally, any ally. His gaze snagged on Olivia and hardened. "Not her." The manager winced. "Mr. Harrison, please." "No," Harrison snapped. He stabbed a finger toward Olivia. "This has gone far enough. I was humiliated in the lounge. In public. Because she thinks she can talk to people however she wants." Olivia didn't move. Calm radiated off her like steady heat. "Mr. Harrison," she said evenly, "this is a private terminal. You were escorted here by staff as a courtesy, not as a right. If you would like to continue your travel today, you'll do so in accordance with our code of conduct." He gave a dry laugh. "Your code of conduct?" He took an unsteady step forward. "You don't even belong in this room." Before Olivia could answer, the side door opened and three executives in tailored suits entered in a cluster, the Horizon delegation. The tallest, a woman with steel gray hair and an engineer's posture, clocked Olivia and broke into an easy, surprised smile. "Olivia, we're a bit early," she said, offering her hand. "It's good to finally meet in person." The air in the room recalibrated. Flight attendants straightened. The manager's shoulders dropped an inch with relief. Harrison's jaw froze as if someone had tapped it with a cold chisel. "Welcome," Olivia said, taking the woman's hand. "I'm glad you're here. This won't take long." The introductions were quick and surgical. "Evelyn Kincaid," the woman said, "Chief Strategy Officer." Beside her, Marcus Jean, Ops, and Priya Kapoor, Finance. Evelyn turned to Harrison with a polite, puzzled nod, reading the scene like a pilot reads weather. "And you are?" Harrison fumbled for footing. "A customer who was disrespected," he said, voice pitched too loud. "By her." Evelyn's brow flicked, cool and curious. She looked back at Olivia, whose face didn't change. "We can step into the conference room," Evelyn offered, tone neutral but decisive. "If there's an operational matter to address, perhaps it's an opportunity to discuss your standards." "There is," Olivia said, still looking at Harrison. "It's an opportunity to discuss what respect looks like in public spaces and on our aircraft." They moved to the glass-walled conference room. A long table, 8 chairs, a tray of still water, one screen on the wall idling with Skyline's logo. Through the glass, the private terminal hummed at a respectful distance. Harrison remained by the door, sun planted quietly against the wall, eyes skating to the floor. The manager hovered outside with the charter team, deliberately out of earshot. Olivia didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table and rested her fingertips lightly against the polished wood, like a pianist finding middle C. A customer experience story has two sides, she said. One is service quality. The other is human dignity. Today we had a failure on the second. Harrison swung the door wider. This is insane. You can't make me the villain because I asked someone to move. You didn't ask, Olivia said, and her tone placed the whole room on a quiet leash. You commanded. You judged. You humiliated a stranger you assumed was beneath you. And when you were corrected, politely, you escalated. Silence hung. A clean, clinical silence that stripped the scene to bone and nerve. Marcus folded his arms and leaned back as if to widen the camera angle. Priya's pen hovered over a notebook she hadn't opened. Evelyn watched Olivia the way a pilot studies an instrument, measuring not just the display, but whether it could be trusted in fog. Olivia kept her voice low. We operate aircraft, but we carry people. If dignity doesn't board, safety never truly does. Something in the sentence landed. It lingered. It lived there in the glass room like a truth newly discovered. Harrison worked his jaw. She told me she owns the airline, he said, incredulous, cheeks blotching. Do you see what I mean? Delusions. She threatened me in front of my son. Evelyn turned slightly. Olivia? Olivia's eyes didn't leave Harrison's. I said I run this business, she replied. Because I do. It wasn't boastful. It was a calibrated instrument reading. It gave the room its horizon. Evelyn exhaled a composed breath. She smiled, not warmly, not coldly, like a chess player appreciating a position that clarified the board. Mr. Harrison, she said, her tone softening into a professional glide, you're speaking to the Chief Executive Officer of Skyline Airways. The words slid across the glass and stuck. Harrison's son looked up for the first time, eyes wide, not with awe but with sudden context. Harrison's hand fell from the door handle, the hinge catching it back inch by inch. The blood rose and then drained from his face, leaving the kind of pale that looks like a confession. Olivia gave him that moment. She didn't crowd it with more words. She let the fact build its own scaffolding in his mind. And then she decided the terms. Here's what happens next, she said, voice with the weight of a gavel but none of the volume. Mr. Harrison, your conduct today violates our passenger code. You will not be traveling on Skyline Airways this afternoon. We will rebook you with a partner carrier at our expense, leaving tomorrow morning from Newark. She nodded toward the glass. The manager outside was already on his phone. Your son may travel today if he wishes. Alternatively, we can arrange ground transport home for both of you. Harrison stumbled for a breath. You're banning me? For what? For asking for a seat. For treating a human being like furniture, Olivia said. For doubling down when corrected. For doing it in front of your child. For carrying your entitlement like a weapon. She tipped her chin slightly, not quite pity, not quite warning. And for refusing accountability when offered a quieter exit. His panic surfaced now, pearled on his forehead. Control had been his currency. It was slipping through his fingers like dry sand. You can't do this to me, he said, but it was a child's argument, pure volume no law. I can, Olivia said, unblinking. Because we won't fly people who make the air unsafe for others. Bias is turbulence. Disrespect is wind shear. We train to avoid both. The image held the table, bias as an invisible force, disrespect as a sudden drop. Even Harrison understood it. The metaphor bypassed pride and went straight for instinct. He looked at his son as if seeking a different script. The boy wouldn't meet his eyes. Evelyn spoke now, crisp and careful. Olivia, may I ask, do you formalize these actions? A behavior-based removal protocol. We do, Olivia said. Incident logs. Staff impact statements. Offer of remediation where appropriate. Consequence where necessary. She turned slightly so Evelyn could see her profile and her principal at once. Dignity isn't a perk. It's a standard. Priya's pen hit the page, finally. Marcus nodded once, eyes narrowing with the professional interest of a man who measures everything in downstream effects. Harrison tried for anger again, but it broke in his throat and came out as something less certain. "My lawyer will hear about this." Olivia tilted her head. "So will mine," she said, and there was that same evenness. No threat, just the audit trail of accountability. "He'll be copied on your rebooking confirmation." The manager tapped once on the glass. Olivia nodded him in. He approached with the controlled empathy of a nurse. "Mr. Harrison," he said softly, "I have your new itinerary. We've upgraded the hotel and arranged a driver. I also have 2 options for your son if he travels today." The son finally spoke, voice small, barely cracking out of the quiet. I'll stay with my dad." Olivia looked at him then, not as a weapon, not as a witness, but as a 17-year-old caught in a lesson he hadn't asked to learn in public. "There's no wrong answer," she said, and her voice lost all the courtroom edges, kept only the humanity. "You can both stay. You can both go. Either way, you're not defined by a moment. You're shaped by your next one." The boy's eyes flickered, hurt, relief, confusion, something like gratitude braided through with embarrassment. He nodded once, unable to say more. Harrison's shoulders sagged. A tremor of something, regret maybe, moved across his face like a shadow passing over water. "I didn't mean to." He trailed off, swallowed. "I just wanted a seat." "You wanted priority over a person," Olivia said, and let the truth rest on the table like a clear glass. "There's a difference." He looked smaller now, dimensions redrawn without the scaffolding of superiority. The room felt different around him, as if it had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. Evelyn stood, smoothing the line of her jacket. "We should let the manager complete arrangements," she said, practical. "Olivia, if you're ready, we can review the charter logistics." Olivia nodded and started around the table. As she passed Harrison, she paused, just long enough to give him the dignity of direct address, but not long enough to make the moment about anything but accountability. "Justice isn't humiliation," she said quietly. "It's a consequence. What you do with it is up to you." Her words hung there, balanced, unavoidable, and then she moved on. They stepped into the corridor. The terminal recovered its gentle murmur. Sunshine fell across the floor in clean rectangles. From the apron, the faint scent of jet fuel drifted in, metallic, alive, a promise of distance and arrival. "Impressive," Marcus said under his breath as they walked. "Not the policy, the delivery." "It's a muscle," Olivia said. "You train it or you tear it." Evelyn's mouth quirked at the edge, an engineer's smile for a phrase that fit into a machine. "I want to understand how you scaled that culture," she said. "Most carriers can write a memo on respect. Few can enforce it without losing the room." "Enforcement is math," Olivia said. "Culture is story. You need both." She gestured toward the glass room where the manager was handing Harrison a folder. "You show, you measure, you repeat. You make dignity more contagious than prejudice." Priya glanced back almost involuntarily. "And when it doesn't take?" Olivia's eyes cut briefly to the jet. "You land," she said. "You set a boundary. You try again with the next passenger." They reached the security door to the tarmac. The guard checked the badges he already recognized and waved them through. The outside air wrapped them in noise and light. The call-in response of ground crew, the bright flash of reflective vests, the soft whine of an auxiliary power unit feeding the cabin systems with a steady heartbeat. Halfway down the stairs, Olivia felt more than heard a presence behind her. She turned. Harrison stood at the top of the steps, son at his side, the manager close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to let a man choose his next sentence. Harrison raised a hand, not to demand, not to accuse, but to ask for permission to speak. It was the first respectful motion he'd made all day. Olivia didn't climb back up. She met his eyes across the short distance. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, unadorned, raw from disuse. "To you. And to whoever I made feel small." He swallowed. "I was wrong." Wind tugged at the cuffs of his jacket. The boy stared at the stairs, as if listening to the concrete. Olivia nodded once. "Thank you," she said. Apology accepted. The manager shifted his weight, relief measurable. The boy exhaled, shoulders loosening half an inch. Olivia added, "If you want to do more than say sorry, teach your son what today costs you. And teach him why." Harrison nodded, eyes wet and surprised at themselves. He put a tentative hand on his son's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch. The moment wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. It was the beginning of a pivot, the first degree of a course correction that, carried long enough, actually changes where you land. Olivia turned back toward the jet. Inside, the cabin glowed, a modern hush of cream leather and quiet ambition. She let the doors seal behind them, shutting out the terminal and its collected static, leaving only the pressurized promise of altitude. The flight attendants moved with choreography, offering water, stowing garment bags, running the silent ritual that turns aluminum into sanctuary. Evelyn slid into a club seat and buckled in. "One question before we taxi," she said, voice low enough to stay in the circle of their seats. "Why handle it yourself? You could have deferred to security. Or to a policy manual." "Because leadership is a contact sport," Olivia said. "Policies don't change hearts. People do. If I ask my crews to protect dignity at 35,000 feet, I can't outsource it at sea level." Evelyn studied her for a beat, then nodded, as if a piece of the partnership math had just solved itself. Marcus turned to the window, satisfied by an answer that respected both story and system. Priya closed her notebook without writing, the kind of silent endorsement that means the model already lives off the page. The intercom pinged. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Olivia felt the familiar lift of the brakes releasing, the soft push as the jet began its slow roll toward the runway. She looked out across the tarmac, ground crew guiding with wands, engines inhaling, the city beyond the fence throwing sunlight off glass towers like signals. The scene that had nearly swallowed her morning already looked small from here, contained, instructive, resolved with consequence. Still, a ribbon of adrenaline unwound through her chest. Justice wasn't a performance. It was a practice. Each time, the stakes were real, the variables messy, the outcomes imperfect. But each time, the muscle grew. As the jet paused at the hold short line, Olivia closed her eyes briefly and let the hum settle her bones. Then she opened them and found Evelyn watching her again, not like a supplicant to a guru, but like one pilot to another. "You have altitude," Evelyn said quietly. "Let's see what we can build at scale." "Let's," Olivia said. The engines roared, confident but controlled. The runway unfurled. The cabin pressed them gently into their seats. Outside, the terminal slipped away, small figures moving with tiny, brave gestures, the manager guiding a father and son toward a car, a lesson loading into the trunk beside their suitcases. Up here, the city organized itself into patterns, grids and rivers, routes and runways. Patterns you could study. Patterns you could change. On climb out as the clouds accepted the jet, Olivia let one thought surface and stay. Power wasn't the point. The purpose was. And purpose, held with patience and teeth, could outfly anyone's prejudice. Have you ever been in a moment where you had to choose between being quiet and setting a boundary in public? How did you handle it, and what did it cost, or save? As the Skyline jet ascended into the sky, slicing through the clouds with effortless power, Olivia sat back in her seat, her body finally relaxing as the world below seemed to fade away. The hum of the engines was a steady reminder of the distance between her and everything that had just happened. The encounter with Harrison, the drama, the tension, it all seemed so far behind her now. But the lesson, the message, was still very much alive. Olivia's mind drifted, but it wasn't to escape. She thought about the moments before, the way she'd maintained her composure despite the underlying emotional storm. The way Harrison's arrogance was an outward reflection of the prejudice and entitlement that so often go unchecked. But she had stood her ground. She had made sure that dignity, not entitlement, had the last word. And while the power shift had been monumental, it was not about her triumph over him. It was about the realization that justice could be served with grace, that power could be wielded with patience. Racial discrimination, whether blatant or insidious, always creates a fracture in society. It isolates. It divides. But Olivia knew the path forward wasn't about erasing those divides. It was about building bridges over them, one act of accountability at a time. The world was filled with moments like Harrison's, a microcosm of the systemic issues that plagued industries, communities, and everyday lives. But just like that, with one moment of reflection and action, change had begun. As the clouds parted and the city skyline appeared beneath the wing, Olivia couldn't help but feel that the journey ahead would require more than just her. It would require all of us to confront the discrimination that lurks in everyday encounters and to speak out, boldly, directly, without hesitation. Because what Olivia had done today wasn't just about silencing a man. It was about amplifying the voices of those who have been silenced for too long. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the stakes feel impossibly high. She couldn't change the world alone, but she knew that every small act of resistance, every quiet moment of accountability, would eventually make a difference. If you believe in justice and equality, Olivia thought to herself, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can fight for change.